Overlord Volume 7 Chapter 1 Chapter 1 Invitation to Death, translated by Nigel Proofreader/Editor, Deus Ex Machina Part 1 Arwentar, the imperial capital, lay in the western region of the Baharuth Empire. At its center was the imperial palace, that was the residence of the man known as the Bloody Emperor Jerknavrun Farlord Elnix. It was surrounded by universities, the Imperial Magical Academy, and all manner of government buildings which radiated out from it, and it could be considered the heart of the empire. While its population was lower than that of the royal capital of the Riestai's kingdom, it was larger in scope than the royal capital. In addition, several years of reform meant that the empire was currently in the middle of its greatest boom in history, with non-stop innovation and a steady stream of resources and human talents coming in. The old was being torn down to make way for a promising future, and the faces of the residents were bright. Ains and Narbril walked through the heated, bustling city streets. Under normal circumstances, Ains would be gawking at everything as he walked, like a country bumpkin fresh from the farm. At the same time, he would have been deeply moved by how different this place was from the kingdom. However, those emotions were almost absent in Ains. The state of his heart was reflected in his actions and his troubled steps. What ruled him now was the feeling of unhappiness. Coming to the empire had been part of Demiurge's plan, and the more he thought about it, the more his eyebrows, illusory as they were, knotted together. The concept of forbearance was completely unnecessary for Ains Ulgaun, the supreme ruler of Nazarick. Neither did he need to suppress his feelings of frustration. Ains's word was law, and as a leader, all he had to do was speak and black would become as white. By right, there was nothing which would not go as he wished. That being the case, why had things ended up like this? That was because he wanted to reject Demiurge's proposal, but he could not, for various reasons. The objective of the plan, demonstrate the power of Nazarick, was simple enough to understand, and its effects would show themselves immediately. That said, Ains disliked it, because he felt that doing so would bring shame upon the handmade creations of his friends. It was quite unsightly to reject an excellent plan based on personal feelings alone, and he did not want the others to feel that he was an uncharitable person in his role as supreme leader. Besides, he had no other ideas to serve as an alternative. Objecting to someone's proposals, with nothing else to replace them, was essentially picking a fight with the other party. It was not Ains' status as a ruler, but his experiences as a salaryman which told him this. Ains began muttering the words he had used to talk himself down several times already. I need to be calm. I need to cool my head. I need to be rational. If forced to choose between reason and emotion, a superior ought to select reason. The type who act on their emotions might be able to reap great rewards if they channel all their energies into their work, but for the most part it never ends well for them. Besides, the die has been cast. Ains had no lungs, but he still took a deep breath, and then exhaled. The surrounding citizens looked in puzzlement at this warrior, who was suddenly sucking in and expelling the air as he walked, but they did not seem to mind. His imposing, heroic build often drew the stares of passers-by. In particular, it was even more common for others to look at him after he had been hailed as a hero. Therefore, he paid no heed to the gazes of others unless he was putting on a show, riding Hamsuk, or some other special circumstance came up. After repeating that cycle a few times, only a little bit of annoyance remained within him. That was when he noticed Narbril, who was trailing behind him. Forgive me, I seem to have been walking a little too fast. Ains was a man, and the way he took large strides in armor was completely different from the way which the feminine Narbril moved in her robe. After considering her physical attributes, she was probably not having too much difficulty, but as a man, he had to apologize for walking ahead while only thinking of himself. Not at all, it is fine. Is that so? Was that her answer as a servant, or did she really not mind? Ains had no idea, so all he could do was shorten his stride while looking for something to talk about. He felt uncomfortable about the prickly air around him just now, and he racked his brains for some way to change the mood. However, he could not think of a suitable topic. Businessmen often use trivial matters like the weather, and so on to get a conversation going. Discussing sports was not a bad idea either, but that required prior knowledge about which team the other party supported. As Ains pondered how to initiate the conversation, he suddenly went tch in his heart. Why am I walking on eggshells around Narbrel, my own subordinate? This is a rare opportunity for me to roleplay how a master should talk to his servant. That said, what should a ruler, or perhaps, an absolute being, talk to his subordinates about? Ains recalled his conversations with his bosses in daily life. Would those be appropriate? Ains was confused. He was the highest authority within the great underground tomb of Nazareth, not the director of an enterprise. Strictly speaking, he was closer to a company's president. No, president's not quite right. That said, what would the king of the kingdom say to Gazef Stronov? If only I could use that as a reference. That said, there was no point thinking about that now. Going on in silence like this made the mood too grim. Ains decided to throw caution to the wind and say the first thing which came to mind. Nabe, what do you think of this voice of mine? Ains tapped his vocal cords with his index finger, or to be precise, the place where his vocal cords should have been. He used a gauntlet hand to press on his throat. He should have felt nothing through the metal, but there was a sensation of squishiness instead. There was also a strangely out-of-place moistness there. I pray you will forgive my frankness, but I do not quite like that voice. It is not because it sounds strange, but because I find your usual voice to be quite marvelous, Maman San. I understand that you have reasons which prevent you from doing so, but I cannot help but wish you would resume using your normal voice, Maman San. Is that so? I think this voice has a magnetic quality to it, and sounds quite good. Neuronist selected it from among those of 50 people, so I feel it has a certain charm which cannot be put into words. Ains suddenly recalled what his own voice sounded like in a recording, and groaned quietly. However, his mood immediately restabilized. Is that so? I prefer your normal voice, Maman San. Thank you, Nabe. However, now that I think about it, I did not expect that I could make use of this. There was no telling if Ains was speaking from the heart, or merely rattling off pleasantries. As he thought, he poked his throat once more. He could feel the life form stuck there, a lip bug, shifting around. Perhaps it might be ticklish if he were human. Did I just not know about it, or was it added in a later update? I can't say for sure that not knowing about this won't inconvenience me. It's not just my knowledge of this world which I need to check, but my own knowledge of Yggdrasil as well. How troublesome. The game company wanted Yggdrasil's players to be able to enjoy the feeling of exploring the unknown. They wanted their players to play around and experiment with all sorts of things, so the developers produced a staggering amount of game content and included systems that could fine-tune that data. Thus, the unknown stretched out before the players. They did not provide any information about the game world's map, and they were also inconsiderate enough not to supply any news about the game's dungeons and things such as ore mining, food preparation, or the raising of magical beasts. In a world like this, one had to investigate and discover things on one's own. In fact, even the items that one could and could not use could only be felt out through repeated trial and error on the player's part. There were walkthrough sites and news sites, but those sites only hosted a compilation of publicly known information, or very untrustworthy rumors. Yggdrasil was a game of exploring the unknown. Thus, any information one uncovered would be very valuable. There was no merit in publishing this valuable information for any stranger to view free of charge. Ultimately, one could only rely on the information that one's guild had uncovered, or information traded from a reliable guild. Everything else was useless and worthless news. There had even been a period of time when people had left suspicious posts on message boards along the lines of "I'm leaving my guild, so I'm going to reveal all my guild's secrets now." Well, some of that information had been accurate. There had once been a guild called Three Burning Eyes. It was a guild formed by the master of a website, who ran a paid membership information site, and they often practiced the bad habit of sending spies into high-level guilds to steal their information. However, the developers did not consider this a bad habit. They tacitly agreed that this was a valid means of gaining information. However, that did nothing to mollify the parties who had their information stolen. Those high-level guilds were utterly furious, so they formed an alliance and attacked Three Burning Eyes. The alliance stationed people at the respawn points within the temples of the city containing the guild's home base, then began piking the guild's members. They then proceeded to repeatedly PK the guild members right after they respawned. Eventually, Three Burning Eyes collapsed, and the guild members scattered to the winds. In the end, they published all their information for free onto the web. That had been a nostalgic memory. Well, there were no spies in Ain's old gown. But if that incident had not happened, perhaps we might have had more members. That incident had caused Ain's old gown to stop recruiting. With only 41 members, they were the least populous of the high-ranked guilds. Perhaps there might have been highly reliable websites in the last days of Yggdrasil. However, Ain's had only browsed those sites during the golden age of Ain's old gown, when they had been in their full glory. At that time, there had been precious little useful information on those sites. My knowledge might have stagnated there. Granted, I did pay attention to the developer updates. There must surely be other Yggdrasil players in this world other than myself. I need to consider the danger of losing to them in terms of knowledge. After bringing 8 fingers under his banner, Ain's had learned much about the region surrounding Nazarick. That included a great deal of information about the kingdom and the empire, which was currently being put to good use. However, there was very little information about the Holy Kingdom, the Theocracy, and the Republic, so he would have to carefully gather information on those places in the future. Good grief, the more I think about it, the more worried I get. I wish I had a more cheerful topic to think about instead. Ain's paused here, and then he casually glanced around. Speaking of which, the Empire really is quite lively. Is that so? It feels about the same as Irantal to me. After hearing Narbrel's words, Ain's looked around once more. The streets are filled with life and the people's eyes are gleaming. There is a certain ambience in the air, one which belongs to people who believe their lives are going to get better. As expected of Maman-san, Narbrel said from a small distance behind him. However, Ain's felt embarrassed by his own words and did not answer her. That was simply an impression he had gotten, and he was not confident in the accuracy of his assessment. Don't tell me I was infected by Pandora's actor. Ambience, I can't believe I could say something as pretentious as that without getting embarrassed. Did I think I was a poet or something? In the royal capital, he had needed to act like a hero to some extent, so Ain's had played the role of one. It would seem he had not fully gotten out of the part yet. The face under the closed helm turned red from mild embarrassment, although a skeletal face could not blush, and just then Ain's saw the inn which Flutter had told him about before his eyes. This was the highest grade inn in the imperial capital, and even from a distance, one could tell it was more luxurious than Irantal's finest inn. If one considered the inns in the royal capital to have a long and distinguished history, then this inn of the imperial capital was a newly opened, high-end hotel, and the question of which inn was better would be decided by personal preference. All right, we can't be sure until we go in to take a look, but I think we've got the right place. Ain's briefly felt the adamantite rank plate dangling at his chest, and then headed for the inn's entrance. Much like in Irantal, the entrance was flanked by muscular guards in leather armor. The men cast suspicious glances at Maman and Nabe as they walked through the arch. Then, as they saw a certain item, their eyes suddenly went wide. Is that the real thing? It must be, given their gear. He could hear them whispering to each other. As Ain's walked before the tense, nervous guards, they politely asked him in stiff tones, "Please forgive me if I offend you, adamantite-ranked adventurer-sama, but may I please see the proof of your identity?" Ain's took off the plate and asked, "Does this inn not take walk-in customers?" "Yes. Unfortunately, in order to maintain the appropriate tone, our establishment does not accommodate guests who have not been previously introduced. But of course, you would be an exception, adamantite adventurer Salma." One of the guards wiped his hands on his clothes, bowed deeply, and then gingerly accepted the identity plate like it was something fragile. He then turned it over and read out the letters there. "Maman, the Black Salma?" "Indeed." I have verified it and there is no doubt. Thank you for offering us the proof of your adamantite rank. Just like before, the guard carefully returned the plate to Ains. The plates which denoted an adventurer's rank were made out of the material corresponding to said rank, and this little piece of adamantite cost a tidy sum. Granted, adamantite was a very hard metal, and it would not be scuffed or scratched just by dropping it on the ground, but if they misplaced it, they would have to pay out a hefty amount. For example, a Garin parrot, a crow-like bird, might snatch it away from the side while it was being returned. This was not a fable concocted to remind them to be careful when handling valuable items. This was an actual example of what had happened in the past. After Ains took it back, the two guards looked visibly relieved, like a weight had been taken off their shoulders. Then, may I come in? Of course, Maman-sama. Please allow me to escort you to the concierge. I see. Then, by all means. The kingdom did not have the practice of tipping. Was it the same in the empire? Ains thought about things like that as he let the guard lead them on. After entering the inn, they passed through a lounge whose floor seemed to be made of large stone slabs before heading straight to the concierge. I have with me the adamantite-ranked adventurer Maman-sama and his companion. The cultured-looking man seated at the counter glanced at the guard. The guard then bowed reverently to Ains before returning to his post. I bid you welcome, Maman-sama. Please accept my sincerest thanks for choosing to reside at our humble establishment for the duration of your stay in the imperial capital. The man at the counter bowed deeply to Ains. No, it's fine. I'll be staying here for a night. Very well. Then, may I trouble you to sign our guest register? Ains smiled under his closed helmet, then picked up the pen and wrote. His signature read Maman in the language of the kingdom. He had practiced writing it dozens of times. Thank you very much. May I know what sort of room you would like? Personally, Ains did not mind a cheap room. However, as usual, he could not do that. I can't eat, so a room without meals would be fine. Ains recalled several dishes from this world. There was a green-colored fruit juice with a sweet fragrance. There was something pink which looked like scrambled eggs. There were also pieces of sliced meat covered in some kind of blue liquid. They all piqued his curiosity, but he could not eat them. Libido, appetite, and the need to sleep. This body of mine has a lot of benefits, but I've lost a lot of things as well. What a shame. That said, if I still had my body of flesh, there's a high chance I might have lost myself in my desires. Ains imagined himself in bed with Albedo, and his face twisted slightly. That was because the mental image of a superior committing sexual harassment on a female employee, or worse, had appeared in his mind. Granted, Albedo does seem to love me, this is a complicated feeling. If only I hadn't done that back then, oops. Pardon me, just give us an appropriate room. By the way, since we don't have the common trade currency, can we pay with kingdom coins? Of course. The kingdom's currency and the empire's currency has always been exchanged on a one-for-one basis. I see. Then we shall have to impose upon you. Very well, then we shall prepare a suitable room for you, Maman-sama. Could I trouble you to wait for a while in the lounge bar? Ains looked toward the bar in question. It was very spacious and gave off a very classy feeling, and it looked like it could seat around 50 people. The chairs looked like they would be very comfortable. A bard was performing quiet music in the background. The food and drinks there are free of charge, so please feel free to relax at your leisure. One received better service if one paid more. That much was the same in any world where one went. However, this service did not please Ains at all. Understood. Then, let's go, Nabe. Ains brought Nabe to the lounge bar, and took a seat on a nearby chair. There were several other guests in the lounge, all of whom appeared to be adventurers. High-level adventurers would receive massive payments just for a single job, and their living standards would go up along to match. Living in an inn like this was hardly a problem for them. That was probably true for any city, be it the royal capital or Irantal. Ains checked to see that the adamantite plate around his neck was visible to others. Letting the other guests talk among themselves and build his reputation for him was a good idea too. Ains felt others look at him as he perused the drinks menu in front of him. I can't read this. He flipped through the pages at random. He went through the menu despite not being able to read it, in order to ward off suspicion. Ains had brought along the reading glasses he had lent to Sabaz as a precaution, but he could not take his time using them here. Sabaz. Swear, huh? He recalled the face of his subordinate, and quietly spoke the name of the woman whose name it called to mind. Has something happened to that woman? No, it's nothing important. I was just thinking about how she had adapted to all of this. While he had entrusted Sabaz with Swear's care, Ains had promised her his protection, and as a business owner, he was obliged to pay attention to the well-being of his employees. I think they will be fine. Currently the head maid is in confinement, so Sabaz-sama is teaching her how to be a proper maid. After she learns the appropriate etiquette, she will be taught how to cook, and how to perform other duties. Once we have determined what duties suit her, she will be officially assigned a position. I see. Very well, it should be fine handing the matter to Sabaz. Also, I think it's about time we released those two from confinement. Albedo's anger should have cooled by now. Narbril did not answer. All she did was nod her head. Sensing a lull in their conversation, the waiter approached them. Have you decided what you wish to order? I'd like an iced macchiato. Narbril? The same for me. Pick what you want to drink. It's fine. No, I do want the same thing. More milk in mine, please. Very well. The waiter bowed deeply, and then retreated in silence. Macchiato was a drink Ains had commonly seen in Oriental's inns, and it looked like a latte coffee. The smell was reminiscent of a latte as well, but Ains had also seen separate latte and regular coffees. Incidentally, Ains had no idea what it tasted like. It went without saying that he could not drink it. He had tried, of course, but it had all leaked out through the bottom of his chin, and he had not been able to taste anything. However, he ended up ordering it anyway, because it looked like something which only high-class establishments would sell. He felt that it suited places like these. As Ains wiped away his non-existent sweat, Ains asked Narbril a question in a matter-of-fact way. Nabe, what does macchiato taste like? He had asked her because he knew she had drunk it before. Narbril paused to think. This was probably the sort of look one would have on their face if they were thinking about how to explain the taste of coffee to someone else. How shall I put this? It is very much like a cafe shakerato. However, it tastes of condensed milk, so I do not quite like it. Is that so? That sounds delicious. Shakerato? I've never heard of a drink like that before. It might also be a beverage unique to this world. I feel it is merely passable. Ains casually responded, and then the drinks came. Don't mind me, just help yourself. It would be strange if both of us didn't touch our drinks. He had grown used to not removing his helmet in the kingdom, and so Ains had completely forgotten to take it off when the drinks came. The way he said so in such a natural way felt very unnatural. Thank you very much. Drink, then, and listen to me as you do. I plan to spend 2 days seeing the sights of the imperial capital. I hear that the central markets have a wide variety of stock, and just browsing them is quite interesting. Then, there's the northern markets, which seem to contain a majority of shops stocking magic items. Adventurers go there regularly. That information had been provided by 8 Fingers, who were now under Ains' thumb. They had also supplied a lot of news about the underworld, but Ains had no intention of getting involved in such matters, so he had only skimmed that information. We'll proceed to the Adventurers Guild on the 3rd day. I'd like to meet and get to know the Empire's adamantite-ranked adventurers, but if that's not possible, we'll just take a simple, quickly completed task to spread our fame. If all goes as planned, we will be able to leave within 7 days. Do you have any suggestions? Narbril, who had not touched her drink, but was only listening in silence, simply shook her head. Part 2. The imperial capital was the crystallization of the empire's authority, and it contained many sights, which would make a person gasp in awe. One of them made just about every visitor to the imperial capital exclaim in wonder. That was, the fact that just about every street was paved with brick or stones. That was a sight which one could not see in the surrounding countries, other than the slain theocracy, which was even more advanced than this place. Of course, not every city in the empire was this way. Even so, it was a subtle yet potent testament to the empire's strength and power, one which had impressed the ambassadors of the surrounding countries. Of particular note was the Central Avenue. It was a major thoroughfare of the imperial capital, and much like other public streets, the center was for horses and carriages, while the sides were for human traffic. The difference was that there were safety fences set up along the dividing lines between the parts for people and the parts for horses and carriages, in order to ensure the safety of pedestrians. Street lights sprouted on either side of the road, and they glowed with magical light after nightfall. Speaking of which, many knights were on patrol, mindful of the safety of their surroundings. A smiling man strolled casually along this road, the safest in the empire, humming as he went. The man was roughly 175 centimeters tall, and he looked to be around the age of 20. His hair was blonde and his eyes were blue, while his skin had a healthy tan. His looks were hardly uncommon in the empire. One could not say he was particularly handsome, and his even features were the sort which would be easily lost in a crowd. However, he radiated a subtle charisma. The source of that charisma seemed to come from the faint, yet lively smile on his face, as well as his confident and open gestures. With every step he took, the sound of chain links clinking rang forth from beneath his spotless, high-grade clothing. A sharp individual would be able to tell that it was the sound of a chain shirt. He had a blade on either hip. Each was around the length of a short sword. They had round, fully enclosed knuckle guards, and while their sheaths were hardly exquisite in make, they were clearly not cheap stuff. Behind his waist was a mace for bludgeoning attacks, and a mail piercer for piercing attacks. Carrying one or even two weapons was a perfectly reasonable thing in this world. But very few people would carry all the weapons needed to execute bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing attack methods. Anyone knowledgeable would recognize him for an adventurer. Anyone who was truly knowledgeable would notice that he lacked the plate which adventurers wore around their necks, and would thus conclude that he was a worker. Workers. They were those who had deviated from the path of the standard adventurer. The Adventurers Guild would take on, research, and assign requests to the appropriately ranked adventurers. In other words, the guild would thoroughly investigate the legitimacy of any job requests made of them. Therefore, the guild sometimes rejected dangerous work, things that would endanger civilians, or which were illegal in nature. Depending on the circumstances, they might even consider the requester to be an enemy. For instance, the guild would oppose work like looking for raw ingredients for narcotics with all its might. The guild would also reject requests which threatened the balance of nature. For example, the guild would never accept requests to kill the apex predator of a forest. This was to avoid the disruption to the natural order, which would result from killing such a creature, such as other monsters leaving the forest. Of course, if the apex monster left the forest of its own accord, and invaded human lands, that would be a different matter entirely. In other words, adventurers were sort of like allies of justice. However, such high-sounding ideals were not the only thing which made the world go around. It was quite easy to imagine that some people were willing to do dangerous jobs for money. And then there were those people who simply enjoyed killing monsters. These people, who did not seek the light of the adventurer's life, but who thirsted for the darkness, were dropouts from the adventuring profession. They were known as workers, and people spoke that name with mockery and caution. However, one could not say that all workers were cut from the same cloth. For instance, if there was a heavily wounded boy in a village, and an adventurer who happened to be passing by used curative magic on him to heal his injuries free of charge, would the adventurer be in the right or wrong? The answer was that he would be wrong. The guild rules stated that adventurers had to collect a fixed fee for such treatment, and they could not provide healing for free. Under normal circumstances, healing magic was handled by the temples, and a patient would need to make a donation before the temples would cast a spell on him. If an adventurer disregarded that point, and provided free healing, he would be taking the temple's business. Therefore, the temples made a strongly worded request to the guild to curb such activities. If one could not accept these rules, then one would have to be a worker. This might sound like malice on the temple's part, but it was because they could profit from their spells that the temples could render service unto the people without having to worry about outside interference. In addition, it was these donations which paid for the raising and training of priests, the exorcism of the undead, the development of new healing spells, all in order for people to lead safer and happier lives. If adventurers cast healing spells for free, the temples might be forced to become more secular and slowly abandon their ideals. There were two sides to every coin, and workers were no exception. It was because they poached animals for money that cheap drugs could be made, which in turn improved people's lives. This man, Hecarim Termite, was a worker, and he was smiling. What should I buy? There were countless magic items that he wanted, but in the end his top priority was defensive gear. Then, there was one more thing. It was an unrelated matter, but there was something else that he wanted. I'll set aside the money for that, the rest can go to magic items for adventuring. Isn't that the wrong way around? I ought to buy the magic items first and save whatever's left over for that. Hecarim scratched his head. In that case, as a frontliner, I ought to boost my magical resistances, so I guess it's time to draw on my savings. No, we might continue killing undead on the Katsa Plains for money, so in order to ward against corpse toxins, I should be buying magic items which boost my resistance to poison, paralysis, and disease. Magical equipment was very expensive, in particular the sort which adventurers used in combat. One-of-a-kind items could be so expensive that Hecarim could not afford them. In any case, the items Hecarim wanted were not that expensive, but they still cost as much as years of an average person's wages. Of course he would carefully consider making such a costly purchase. As he looked forward to his shopping, his eyes met those of the knight standing by the roadside for an instant, and his easygoing expression immediately tightened up. A tag team of a heavily armored knight and a lightly armored knight stood at the street corner, surveying the surrounding conditions. Everyone knew that the temples to the four gods were in the vicinity, and so security was especially strict here. While he doubted that they would arrest people off the streets, Hecarim could sense their gazes resting on the weapons at his waist. It would be one thing if he was an adventurer, but as a worker without any form of backing, he did not wish to go up against the knights who enforced the Empire's safety. The gods seemed to have smiled on him, because the knights compared his face to a wanted list, but did not stop him. Thus, he passed through the densely packed temple district. His guilty conscience at ease, Hecarim looked into the distance, and saw a unique-looking building ahead. At the same time, the wind carried the sound of cheering to him, he could hear bloodthirsty voices and battle cries in the air. That unique building was the Grand Arena, that could only be found in the imperial capital of the empire. It was a very popular tourist spot within the imperial capital. There was no need for him to go all the way there. He saw more than enough blood in the course of his work, and he had no interest in gambling, so one could say that that place did not interest him at all. However, it was still the biggest entertainment outlet for the common man in the imperial capital. The nobles preferred the theater. Given the cheers had reached all the way here, the arena must have been packed to the brim once more. The crowd sounds really excited. Is it a final? The worker team which Hecarim led had fought a series of battles against magical beasts in the arena for work purposes. Surrenders were useless against magical beasts, so defeat meant death. Of course, battles against human beings could be fatal, but it was very rare that the day's activities in the arena did not conclude without a single fatality. Or no, the more people who died, the more fired up the crowd became. The most heavily attended shows were the grand fighting tournaments, where many people died beautiful deaths. Hecarim shrugged. He had no interest in this. He did feel like looking at a blood-soaked battlefield on a day off work. However, he did not fully chase the notion out of his mind, because the various events within the arena might make for excellent conversation topics. I don't want to step into the arena again, but it might be a good idea to ask others about the details of today's show when I get back. After making a mental note of that, he continued walking along a road lined with shops. Soon, he saw a familiar signboard with the words Singing Apple Pavilion written on it. Apparently, a group of bards who all used applewood instruments came together to found this tavern. Come in. It looked old, but the interior